I mentioned that the way that the liturgy of the church is set up is that we have 40 days preparing for the coming of Easter, and then 40 days following Easter. Well, it doesn't quite work out exactly to 40 days. It is still that balance, and most certainly in considering the 40 days of Lent and the 40 days after Easter, that we should be reminded that there is a connection between the 40 days and 40 nights and the story of Moses when the rains came upon the earth, the 40 years that the Israelites wandered in the wilderness, and even as the Gospels begin, the 40 days and nights that Jesus was himself in the wilderness being tempted by the devil. That all of these things are meant to remind us that in the great story that God is continually opening for us, continuing to speak to us about, that all of these events are connected in a powerful way. It's interesting that at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke that we read at Christmas, that there in the proclamation, if you will, of Jesus' birth, that we begin by the Emperor Caesar Augustus declaring a census, that even Quirinius, who is governor of Syria, that even Mary and Joseph go down to Judea, to the town of Bethlehem, that now at the end, or at the beginning of the Acts of the Apostles, we're told from Jerusalem, from Judea and Samaria, even to the ends of the earth. That if you read those two texts together, what you see is that, in a way, Caesar has defined the world, but now in this small place between Bethlehem and Jerusalem, the world is no longer going to be defined by Caesar. It is now going to be defined by what happened in Bethlehem and Judea, and Bethlehem and Jerusalem. Birth, death, and resurrection. That our whole way of thinking and our whole way of understanding and our whole way of living in the world is defined, in a sense, we believe as Christians, defined by Jesus' birth, by his life and ministry, by his death, by his resurrection. Now that all can make perfect sense to us, and in a way it does, because all that we're asked to do is to believe it, to accept it and believe it. Of course, to understand it and to live it out, yes, but to believe it. The problem for the disciples were that they seemingly had come to believe it, but they weren't quite sure what they were to do with it. They had it, they got the belief, they had the teachings of Jesus, they had this understanding that their whole lives are now being defined by Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection, but they didn't know what to do with it. And so what this day is about, Ascension, is to say, well, silly, what you're to do with it is not to keep it to yourself, for one, but rather to go out and to share it with others. As almost then the disciples are going to say, well, what are we to share? And notice even in the scriptures it says, are you going to finally establish the reign of Israel, the kingdom of Israel? Suggesting that they have yet to get it. They're still thinking in the terms of Caesar, that they need a nation, they need the power of the king, they need all of what that's about in order to stand side by side with Caesar. Notice how Jesus responds, and you have to sometimes in Scripture read between the lines, because after they say, are you going to establish Israel now? And you could just imagine Jesus, maybe like my mother and grandmother frequently did after they had told me what I was supposed to do, and I ended up not doing it, of breathing in one of those great big breaths and saying, I just pray to God someday that you'll get it. That's what Jesus probably thought. I just pray to God someday they get it. That they will survive my leaving them. And you see, that's a part of the challenge. that Jesus ultimately is leading them. And they want to hold on to something so tangible, because in that ability to touch power and authority like that of Caesar, they think they will survive. But what the invitation of Jesus throughout his ministry, and now at this time at the end as he departs from them, is that it has nothing to do with the accumulation of power and authority and riches and majesty and whatever else you could imagine. It has to do with being a witness. Well, a witness to what? Well, a witness to the life of Jesus. Well, what about that? What does that mean? Well, as I tried sharing with you over the Easter season, the witness is always to the way in which Jesus acted and behaved in his life towards others because of who he knew God to be. And so if God is about passion and love, with a hunger and thirst for justice, that God was slow to anger, rich in mercy, steadfast in faithfulness, then in Jesus' own life and ministry, we see all of those things present in the way that he reached out to lepers, touched those who were outside. If that's what Jesus' life and ministry was about, then it's not simply being a witness to, well, you remember what Jesus did? But a witness is one who in their own life have been changed and transformed by their encounter with Jesus. But now they begin to act and behave in the way that Jesus did himself. So that a witness is not just simply telling somebody, but a witness is also about doing in the way that that somebody did. I think in the invitation that this day gives or gave to the disciples and can give to us is, notice he says, go out into the world. It was easy, as we saw on Easter, right, that they were locked behind closed doors. And their fear and anxiety about what had happened and the loss that they had could drive them to remain behind closed doors. Like many of us in the sense of losing a loved one, that anxiety over the loss of a loved one and what we are going to do now when that loved one is gone often can drive us into depression and fear and being locked behind closed doors. Maybe not literally, but emotionally and spiritually. And so the invitation is, you can't stay there. You have to get out into the world. Because there in the world is where God's presence not only can be found in the poor and the blind and the lame and the dispossessed, but there out in the world you will now be the instruments and agents for the very transformation of the earth that even Caesar cannot accomplish. Because you have something more powerful than Caesar. If you notice, at the end of the Scriptures, there's a suggestion that they don't quite have that which they need. And so while this day suggests that Jesus ascends into heaven and instructs them that they are to be witnesses in the world, he also said, wait just one more week. Wait just one more week, and then you will have everything that you need, and it will all make sense to you. And so in the wisdom of the church, we got it, but we don't have it all yet. And so we got to, it's like that ketchup commercial. Anticipation. So when you have some anticipation, what does it do? Makes you want it more. And that's the idea. We want it more. Not in a selfish way or an anxious way, but we want more. Meaning to be filled more with the power of the Spirit, such that it will drive out fear and anxiety and hesitation and caution and doubt in our lives. And so that's what we've got to do. just a little bit more. And then we will be clothed with the power of the Spirit. And then there shouldn't be any more testing. Because we know what we need to do